The fifth Indiana Jones movie is here, and already there have been mixed reactions. I took my family to see The Dial of Destiny. Should you? Indiana Jones races against time to retrieve a legendary artifact that can change the course of history. So Harrison Ford returns, and despite him being pretty up there in years, he's still got a great presence when it comes to embodying his iconic character. The movie starts out in the past, and we get to see a great deal of de-aging taking place on Ford. And surprisingly, the majority of it actually looks great. Now, there are a few times when the de-aging just kind of looks off, or as my oldest son said, the eyes just have no soul to them. Well, luckily, this is a minor occurrence, and because most are awesome, I can forgive brief mishaps. So we watch the past portion play out for something like 30 minutes, and then there's an exciting action sequence to kick off the film, while also building out the beginning of the lore for the story. And then we're taken to Indy's present, which I think is about 1968 or 69. I mean, he's obviously older, and he's getting ready to retire from his professorship. And the story actually stops down for a little bit so that we can get a good sense of where Indy is at right now. I mean, what his mindset's like, and what's going on in his life. I mean, it's needed to really establish the character in this new time setting. From there, we then meet Phoebe Waller-Bridge's character, Helena. And while she's fine as a character, her introduction and placement in the storyline, it took way too long to introduce and get established. The interactions, it could have been cut way down because a lot of time is spent on uninteresting and lackluster exposition. And that's something the movie unfortunately suffers from in small portions at various times throughout. The story takes a dip in both pace and intrigue, and it breaks the momentum that had already been building. So that then takes a little while to ramp back up in the pacing, making the 2.5-hour runtime noticeable. But with that being said, when Indy is doing what he does best, whether that be fighting an onslaught of people trying to take something away from him, or he's exploring caves or tombs, the story clicks, and it's both exciting and engrossing. And there are several nods throughout the story to the previous films in the franchise. Some are subtle and others are way more overt, but I really did love the homage to all that came before. It's paying tribute in a small way to the long-running history of this character and his adventures. Now for the cast, we have both returning players and new additions. There's a small part with John Rhys Davies as Sala, and it's great to see him, but I'm really glad that his inclusion has a few small lines of dialogue to explain his location and how he got where he is. And then we have Toby Jones and Boyd Holbrook. Each have kind of pivotal roles, but on the opposite ends of the spectrum. I love Jones's performance. I mean, he's meek and very much an everyman, but then we get to see him show another side of his personality, and it becomes pretty emotional. Holbrook is cold, calculated, somewhat unhinged. And I've seen him as the antagonist in a few things, and he plays it really well. There's a certain level of menace that he gives his character here. It's fun to see the ferocity and the detached psychopathy that he delivers. Now, Antonio Banderas has a small role, and really, his character could have been played by anybody. He's barely in this, and really, he only has one extremely pertinent and necessary line of dialogue that he says to another character that then pays off later in the film. But aside from that, I mean, he was okay. Nothing bad, but also nothing great. I've already mentioned Phoebe Waller-Bridge, and I liked her in the role. I mean, she definitely grew on me as the story went along, transitioning from a character that is questionable to one that we can root for. Now, some of her snark felt a little out of place for the time period, but it wasn't anything major, so it wasn't ruining anything. And finally, we have Mads Mikkelsen. He looks like he's channeling Ronald Lacey's Tot from Raiders, with just the shiny black coat and round eyeglasses that he wears through some of this. And he's a great villain, but there are oddities to his character that were inconsistent. At times, he was utterly ruthless, and then other times, he'd hesitate when it came to brutality, which then created plot conveniences for other characters so that they could get out of situations or to then thwart plans. And there is one part, though, with his character that you have to completely just set all logic aside for. In the opening sequence, he gets injured, and when we see him next, he's just got a small scar across his forehead. Now, the aftermath doesn't match what we see happen, so it's very strange that they chose to do what they did to his character. I mean, I love the scene, it just didn't jive as believable. Now, there are several large action sequences in the movie, and they're high energy and fun. Now, I don't think any of them are really new or unique, but watching Harrison Ford's reactions and facial expressions as just some of the scenes are carried out, that was pretty entertaining. I mean, during some of these, it is pretty obvious that a fake background's in play and it was shot on a green screen. Really, that's unfortunate because when those shots would transition to that fake part, it was very noticeable and it broke me out of the action and the suspense. It went from cinematic to TV quality. That's not something you want in a blockbuster type movie. And of course, all throughout this movie is the phenomenal score by John Williams. When the Indy theme plays, even if it's in small segments, it just sends a flood of nostalgia, reliving memories of all the adventures Indiana goes on. Now, for the main plot, some suspension of disbelief has to be attained. I don't think the premise is entirely believable or really even plausible, but I did enjoy that small portions of the story, it's rooted in fact. And that's something most of the franchise has relied on and executed in wonderful ways. They take something from history that's factual and then build off it to make something fantastical. And it usually works. Now, personally, I wasn't a massive fan of Crystal Skull, but even it has a basis in fact. So that alone is awesome. Now here, the story plays the what-if game using something from ancient history as its starting point, and then it has some fun with it, which then also leads to a very emotional character moment that I thought hit deep and humanizes Indy in a way that we don't often see in his character. So despite this having some slowness to it and story items that felt contradictory, I ultimately had fun with the movie. I mean, it's not the best in the franchise, but it holds its own and it gives us the adventure that we've come to expect from Indiana Jones. The action sequences are energetic and exciting, and the story excels when it focuses on the treasure hunt and its puzzles and obstacles. Harrison Ford gives a great performance and finishes the character with touching emotion and sentimentality. Most of the de-aging effects look wonderful, but the use of fake backgrounds for some of the action bits is distractingly noticeable. The Dial of Destiny revitalizes the adventures Indiana Jones has taken us on for decades, and it dives headlong into history to create a fantastical and enjoyable finale for the franchise. There's no sex or nudity, some profanity, and then a ton of violence. I give Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny 3.5 out of 5 couches. Now, I can certainly see myself rewatching this from time to time, just easily enjoying the adventure. What's your favorite Indy film of the franchise? For me, it's a hard one, but it would definitely be one from the original trilogy. Let me know yours in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.